Good morning, community. I want to share an incident that recently occurred to me just a few weeks ago. It's a rather short story, but more than just recounting what happened, I'm reaching out to seek your advice on what actions I should take next. I should start by saying that I am a police officer in Chile, serving in a unit in the southern part of the country, which I'd rather not specify. My role involves driving and patrolling the streets of my sector during both day and night shifts. Having already completed more than 4 consecutive night shifts, by the 5th night I was extremely physically drained. It's worth noting that my primary responsibility is crime prevention, focused on patrolling. This means that if we are not actively involved in a procedure, we are required to patrol continuously throughout our shift, and sleeping during work hours is considered dereliction of duty and is met with severe penalties. On that day, both my colleague and I were so overwhelmed by fatigue that we decided to park our vehicle on a somewhat secluded plot of land outside the city. We both fell asleep almost immediately, though not fully, since we needed to stay alert for any emergencies. Minutes passed, and while I was half asleep, I suddenly felt someone tapping on my window. Startled, I woke up fearing that someone had caught us sleeping, but instead, I saw a young girl, about 10 years old, standing outside. What was even more bizarre was that she was wearing a dress that left all her arms and legs exposed, despite it being 4 a.m. and the southern part of Chile being known for its cold climate. Noticing she wanted to say something, I started the car engine and rolled down the window. Once I had it down, the girl, with a very serious face, said to me, "I was buried under that house," pointing her finger at a large old red 2-story house in the middle of the plot. What was strange is that I hadn't noticed the house before, otherwise we wouldn't have chosen to sleep there. I quickly started shaking and yelling at my colleague to wake up and make him aware of the situation, who immediately asked me what was going on. However, when I turned around, the girl was nowhere to be found. How was that possible when no more than 5 seconds had passed? Feeling compelled to share everything, I told my colleague the entire story. We tried to find the house that I had clearly seen just moments before, but it was also nowhere to be found. Understandably, he didn't believe anything and mocked me for the remainder of the shift. However, I was so certain of what I had seen that, a few days later during my free time, I decided to return to the site to look for any clues. You won't believe what I found. Indeed, under the vegetation of the place there were traces of what once had been a building, including red wooden materials just like the house I had seen. Now I am left wondering if I should excavate at the site, perhaps uncovering the body of a young girl. And if someone sees me, they might think I am the perpetrator. What do you think I should do? I look forward to your comments, and thank you for listening to my story. Hello, my name is Hiram, and I was a police officer in Mexico City. I had to retire because a serious illness left me with lasting effects, and I can't exert myself much anymore. However, I still remember those days when I worked. Something happened every day, and yes, it was quite exhausting, though I really enjoyed my job. This career left me with many experiences and stories to tell. Everything you can imagine, including paranormal occurrences. For example, I dare to share this story with you today, which happened while I was patrolling with my partner in a middle-class neighborhood of the city. It was nighttime, not too late, but it was already dark. We were driving through that area. It was a weekday and the streets were very deserted, with everyone either sleeping or getting ready to sleep. Suddenly, something caught our attention. "Look, it seems like they're signaling us," my colleague said. When I looked ahead and paid attention, I realized that some people were waving us down to stop. When we reached them, we asked if they needed help. They were 2 young people with a pet dog, walking through the area. They said that as they were walking along the sidewalk, they heard thumps and screams coming from the trunk of a car parked there. We parked to get out and see what was happening. The dog belonging to these people wouldn't stop barking at the trunk of this vehicle. Up until then, neither my colleague nor I had heard any noise coming from inside, but the young people swore that they had clearly heard the desperate screams of a woman and also some thumping. We had to act quickly because if it were true, the woman might have fainted from being inside without oxygen, and that's why she was no longer making noise. In front of the car, there was a building with several apartments. We had to go from one to another asking who owned that car because we couldn't just force open the trunk without being sure. So my partner and I began knocking on doors, and all the neighbors told us that the car belonged to a man who lived in the top floor apartment. We quickly went up there, but when we knocked on the door, no one opened it. There was also no noise coming from inside, and we could see from under the door that the lights were off, so we had no choice but to go down and break a car window to open the trunk. But before doing so, my colleague and I clearly heard a thump coming from the trunk, and it was obvious there was someone there. We quickly forced open the car, and my colleague unlocked the trunk. It was my turn to open it, and I was met with a horrible surprise. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a black garbage bag. There was no person, but from my experience, I knew what I would find inside. My heart was pounding very fast. I asked the two young people with their dog to please leave the area before I opened the bag, thanking them for alerting us. They immediately complied and left the place. Then, between my partner and I, we dragged the bag to the curb and opened it. The first thing we saw was human hair and an arm. I won't give more details out of respect for the victim, but we knew the crime had been committed that same day. So we called the relevant authorities to come and conduct the removal and investigation, as there was nothing more we could do. When reinforcements arrived, they broke down the door of that man's apartment, but no one was there, though the place was in terrible condition. They found many tools used to commit the crime, and the man was on the run. Although a couple of days later they managed to catch him, and indeed he confessed to his crime. It was one of the worst discoveries I had as a police officer, or I dare say the worst, because I couldn't get that image out of my head. Nor could I stop thinking about how the young woman was screaming and banging for someone to find her body, even though she was already dead. Thanks to that, she didn't end up as just another missing person in this country, as the man planned to dispose of her remains the next day, but she fought even after death for her family to find her, and for her to rest in peace. It's a very sad case that unfortunately happens day by day. Take care of yourselves. Hi everyone. I want to share this anecdote anonymously, as I am still employed and do not want to face any issues, but I cannot miss the opportunity to share this with all of you. I am a police officer, and my duty is to patrol the streets and respond to any dangerous situations for society, attending to emergency calls among other things. Everything began when I received a call ordering me to go to a residence in the city. I was the patrol unit closest to the location, so it was my turn to respond. The call was about a woman who reported that someone had broken into her house and she was alone with her two young children. It was approximately midnight when I was on my way. At that time, I did not have a partner, but this did not at all limit my ability to perform my duties. I arrived at the home, a two-story house that was not very large. I had just stepped out of the patrol car when the lady opened the door, already waiting for me with a baby in her arms and another small child, about 5 years old, by her side. I introduced myself and asked about the situation, needing her to tell me everything that had happened since I had not been given much information. She was relatively calm, all things considered, and told me that they had already been sleeping. She was in her room with the baby, and her 5-year-old son was in the next room because the little one said he couldn't sleep with her as his baby brother would wake up crying several times throughout the night, and she had to get up to soothe him. However, that night she heard noises from the next room, where her older son was. She got up and managed to hear a female voice talking to her son. She said that she ran to the boy's room very scared, but when she tried to open the door, it was locked. She knocked on the door asking the boy to open it, but he only screamed for help, very frightened. It was then that she went to the kitchen for a hammer and struck the door lock until it broke. When the door opened, the boy ran out to embrace her, but he was crying so much that he couldn't even talk, unable to tell his mother what had happened or who had been with him. The lady said she had searched her son's room, which was not very large, hammer in hand, prepared to defend her children from whoever was there. But she found no one, which is why she decided to call the police, as she feared for her life and that of her children. I asked them to stay outside while I entered to check the entire house. The lights on the ground floor were off. Only the lights in the upstairs rooms were on. I walked through the whole place without finding anyone, nor were there any signs of forced doors or windows. Everything was relatively normal. I went up to check the rooms and the bathroom. Both were empty, just as the boys' room, which was very strange, because in the room there was only a barred window, so there was no way the supposed person who had been in the room with the little one could have escaped. As I found no one, I decided to go downstairs to inform the lady. But as I was descending the stairs, I saw through a mirror hanging on the wall opposite them something that made me drop my flashlight from the shock. I saw a woman hanging from the railing. I immediately turned around, but there was no one there, and when I looked again at the mirror, there was also no reflection of the woman. I didn't know what was happening. I thought maybe my imagination had betrayed me, but I was very sure of what I had seen. The lady yelled, asking if everything was okay, as she was startled by the noise of my flashlight falling down the stairs. I told her yes, that there was no one in the house, and that they could come in. I told her I had checked every corner and I was sure that there was no one inside, so she went to put her children to bed and then came down to talk to me. She commented that she was still very scared, as it was not the first time that her older son had told her that he saw a lady standing next to his bed at night, but when this happened, he couldn't move or scream, so she thought it was just a recurring nightmare that her son had frequently. But it had never gone as far as that night when she could hear the voice of a woman, and she didn't know what to do since she had no husband, and her family did not live in that city. She also mentioned that they had only been living in that house for a few months, but she couldn't move because the rent was very good for the size of the house. I chose not to tell her what I had seen on the stairs. I didn't want to scare her even more, but I did recommend that for her well-being and that of her children, she should move. It was obvious that something bad had happened there in the past. I guessed maybe the previous owner had taken her own life there, and was perhaps still trapped there. Obviously, I didn't tell her this thought that crossed my mind at that moment. With nothing more I could do for her, I told her I had to leave, but that she should not hesitate to call emergency services for any minor thing that happened, and I recommended that she let her son sleep with her and the baby. And well, I would love to tell you what happened with this family in that house, but I never heard from them again, and my presence was never requested at that residence again. I just hope that she did take my advice, and they moved from that place. That's my story. Have a great night to all. Good evening, everyone. I had never shared any of my strange anecdotes as a police officer before, but now that I am retired, I felt encouraged to do so. Throughout all the years I served as a police officer, I encountered countless things, including some that we were not prepared for at the academy. Strange things that one has to learn to handle only when faced directly with them. And this story is one of those. First of all, I must tell you that I decided to share this anecdote anonymously, as it is supposed that I should not share these things with anyone. But it truly is worth listening to. This happened many years ago, specifically in the year 2008. At that time, I was patrolling with my partner during the night shift, and contrary to what people think, it was the quietest shift. I had already spent several years on the day shift, and there were indeed many more emergency calls during the day. That night, my partner and I were driving through the city, performing our routine rounds and staying alert for any situations, chatting and drinking coffee. Everything seemed quiet until around 3 in the morning when we received a call from the station. We were requested at the municipal cemetery. They did not provide much context. They only mentioned that the security guard at the place had requested an emergency patrol because someone had entered the premises and had caused some damage. Unfortunately, the guard did not have any defense tools. The most he could do was notify the authorities. So we immediately went to that place. We arrived at the cemetery where the guard, a man about 50 years old, was waiting for us with a terrified look on his face. He truly looked very scared, and at the same time bewildered. My partner and I first asked him if he was okay, and then we proceeded with the routine questions, primarily about what had happened. The man responded, almost stuttering from nerves, that they had dug up a body from its grave. He said it was a young man who had been buried just a few days ago. He also mentioned that he had heard a lot of noises, but since he was on the other side of the cemetery, he ran as fast as he could, and when he approached the area from where the noises were coming, he saw two people running away too fast, but he could not see if they were men or women, because when he arrived, these people were already turning towards where the mausoleums were, and he lost sight of them. After that, he encountered that chilling discovery. The body of the deceased was on the ground. A part of the body was still inside the coffin. But what horrified him most was that the body was missing its limbs, emphasizing that this man had been buried intact and whole. My partner and I listened horrified, as this was a new situation, something that had never happened before. But we had to find those responsible for that act. First of all, the man led us to where the remains of that poor man were found. And believe me, it did impact me personally to see that scene, because upon examining the body, it was evident that the limbs had not been cut off with any sharp object, but rather had literally been torn off with great force. My partner and I began to tour the huge cemetery, which lacked much light, because of course it is a municipal cemetery, and it is clear that they do not maintain it properly. There was tall grass among many of the graves. The place was very neglected, which made it even more eerie, as if cemeteries at night were not already creepy enough. Using our flashlights, we searched every corner. We even peered into the mausoleums, but there was no trace of any person. Until suddenly my partner signaled me to be silent. It seemed he had heard something. Both of us stood still and in complete silence when suddenly we heard something moving in a tree next to me. But when I shone my flashlight, a very low laugh, but a very horrible laugh of a woman was heard. My partner and I illuminated the whole tree, as we were sure that those noises were coming from there, until my flashlight lit something, which I still can't get out of my mind. It was something we saw for just 2 seconds, before that thing flew away in the form of a bird. It was an older woman sitting on a large branch with her mouth dripping and biting a human arm. After illuminating her, she jumped to a higher branch, as if she were an animal. And after that, the branches of the tree began to move strongly, until we saw a very large bird flying out of it. My partner was immobile. I tried to make him react, as we had to act. We had to find out what the hell had happened. But he was in shock after seeing something so macabre and out of the ordinary, because it was not about common criminals, it was something more. Something diabolical that our weapons probably couldn't fight. At the moment my partner recovered, he helped me climb the tree, which was quite tall but thankfully had branches low enough to allow me to scale it. I wanted to make sure that the woman was no longer there, but by the time I reached a good vantage point, the tree was empty. We descended and continued to walk through the cemetery, making our way back to the entrance where the guard was waiting. We didn't even know how to start explaining what we had seen, as it was anything but normal. Yet we recounted it just as it happened, and I remember the expression on the guard's face. It wasn't one of surprise, but rather a stoic, nearly expressionless visage, as if he knew something more. My partner pressed him, asking if he had any idea who that woman was, or if he knew anything about her at all. The guard simply nodded. "It's not the first time I've seen those two women here," he confessed. "They show up around dawn. God knows why. I've heard them laughing before, mocking me because they know I can't catch them. As soon as they start running and fade into the dark, I see them transform and fly away as birds." The guard was visibly shaken and seemed fearful that we might not believe him. He admitted he had never spoken of this to anyone, not even to his boss, as he thought it sounded far-fetched and hard to believe. But that night, he was somewhat relieved that others had witnessed it too. He no longer felt like he was going insane for sharing these stories. He knew those women were involved, but alone, he was powerless against them and needed our help. We reported everything to the station, but predictably they didn't believe us. They suggested that if someone had gotten away, it was our fault, and accused us of fabricating the flying women story to cover our incompetence. We were reprimanded, and there was nothing we could do about it. The hardest part for me wasn't that they didn't believe us, but that we were unable to do anything further to assist the guard. He had to continue facing these dangerous nights because he couldn't afford to quit his job. We gave him our personal contact numbers, insisting he should call us if he ever saw those women again, or whatever they were. We promised we would come immediately to help, to attempt to capture them. But that call never came. The guard never contacted us again, and we never received any more emergency calls from that cemetery. We never learned what continued to occur there, and to this day, it remains a heavy burden on my mind, leaving me tormented by the unresolved mystery of what exactly those women were, whether witches, demons, or something else entirely. But one thing is clear, they were entities of malevolence. This was my story. I hope you found it intriguing. Good night to all.